My name is Louis Parker, 62 years old, and I spent 30 years as a pediatrician healing children while raising 3 of my own after my wife Elizabeth died of cancer. This Christmas, I prepared a feast in my lakeside home, hoping to reunite my distant family. Instead, my eldest son Michael stood up and declared, "We voted, and you are no longer a member of our family." Without flinching, I handed him a folder I'd prepared. "Here's a parting gift for you." The color drained from his face as he opened it. "Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you believe family bonds should be unbreakable even when tested by the worst betrayals. Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. Mine began conventionally enough in a middle-class neighborhood in Massachusetts. From an early age, I knew I wanted to be a doctor. There was something about the idea of healing, of making a tangible difference in someone's suffering, that called to me. I worked my way through college with scholarships and part-time jobs, then was accepted to medical school at Boston University. It was there, during my second year of medical training, that I met Elizabeth. She was brilliant with a quick mind and an even quicker smile. We met during an anatomy class when she corrected the professor on a rare anatomical variation we'd discovered in our cadaver. Her confidence took my breath away. 3 months later, we were dating. 2 years after that, we were married. We both specialized in pediatrics, drawn to the unique challenges and rewards of treating children. After completing our residencies, we opened a small practice together in a Boston suburb. Those early years were demanding but deeply satisfying. We worked long hours building our practice, eventually expanding to a staff of 4 doctors and 10 support personnel. Our reputation for excellent care spread, and soon we had one of the most respected pediatric practices in the area. Amid building our professional lives, we started our family. Michael came first, a strong-willed boy with his mother's sharp intelligence and my stubborn determination. 3 years later, Sarah joined us, artistic and sensitive from the very beginning. Then, after a brief pause, Jason completed our family, a thoughtful child who seemed to absorb everything around him. We had what most would consider an ideal life. A thriving practice, a beautiful colonial home in a good neighborhood, 3 healthy children, and a marriage built on mutual respect and shared values. I remember thinking how fortunate we were, how the pieces had fallen into place. Then, when the children were 17, 14, and 8, Elizabeth began experiencing fatigue and pain that wouldn't subside. At first, we attributed it to her demanding schedule and the physical strain of examining active children all day. But as doctors, we both recognized when symptoms needed proper investigation. The diagnosis came like a physical blow, stage 4 breast cancer, that had already metastasized to her bones and liver. With our medical backgrounds, we understood the grim prognosis better than most patients would. Elizabeth faced it with remarkable courage, insisting we be honest with the children about the severity of her condition while maintaining hope for whatever time remained. The next 14 months were a blur of treatments, hospital stays, brief remissions, and returns of the disease, each time more aggressive than before. Elizabeth continued to work as long as she could, finding purpose in caring for her young patients, even as her own strength waned. The children responded differently to their mother's illness. Michael became fiercely protective, often taking charge of household tasks without being asked. Sarah retreated into art, creating beautiful drawings for her mother to brighten her hospital room. Jason, too young to fully comprehend what was happening, simply stayed close to Elizabeth whenever possible, as if his presence alone could heal her. I tried to maintain stability for them while supporting Elizabeth and managing our practice. There were nights I would collapse into bed, fully clothed, too exhausted to even change, only to be awakened hours later by a call from the hospital. Elizabeth died on a Tuesday morning in early spring. The cherry trees she'd planted in our yard were just beginning to bloom. "Make sure they know how proud I am of them," she whispered to me the night before. "And Louis, promise me you'll still find joy. The children will need to see that it's possible." I made that promise, though at that moment joy seemed an impossible, distant concept. After the funeral, I found myself the sole parent to 3 grieving children and the only remaining doctor in a busy practice. The weight of these responsibilities was crushing, but there was no time to falter. The children needed stability, and our patients needed care. The first year was the hardest. I learned through trial and error how to manage a household alone. My cooking skills progressed from burnt offerings to moderately edible meals. I figured out the logistics of school schedules, extracurricular activities, and the emotional needs of 3 very different children at various developmental stages. Michael, being the oldest, stepped up in many ways, but also struggled with anger. He would lash out, then apologize, caught in the cycle of grief. Sarah became quieter, throwing herself into art and music with an intensity that sometimes concerned me. Jason had nightmares for months, often ending up in my bed, clutching his mother's old sweater. I considered hiring full-time help, but ultimately decided against it. The children had already lost their mother. They needed to know their father was fully present. So I adjusted my work schedule, hired additional doctors for the practice, and learned to be more efficient with my time. Date nights and social outings became distant memories as every spare moment went to the children. There were opportunities to date as the years passed. Several times women expressed interest, or friends attempted to set me up. But I never pursued these possibilities seriously. It wasn't just about time constraints, though those were significant. It was about emotional capacity. Giving my children what they needed took everything I had. There simply wasn't enough left for building a new relationship. Each child required something different from me. Michael needed a strong hand, someone to challenge his increasingly ambitious nature while teaching him responsibility. We butted heads often during his teenage years, particularly when he began focusing more on status and appearance than the values Elizabeth and I had tried to instill. Sarah and I developed a special bond through quiet moments. She would sit in my study while I reviewed patient files, sketching or reading, occasionally asking questions about her mother. Was Mum afraid of thunderstorms too? Did she bite her pencils like I do? Each question was a thread connecting her to the woman she was rapidly forgetting. Jason, who had been so young when Elizabeth died, perhaps needed me most of all. He had fewer concrete memories of his mother and seemed determined to forge a close connection with me to compensate. He followed me everywhere, asking about my work, wanting to understand medicine. By the time he was 12, he could discuss pediatric conditions with surprising sophistication. Through those years, I watched them grow and develop their own paths. Michael excelled academically, driven by an internal competitive spirit that both impressed and concerned me. He was always comparing himself to others, measuring success in achievements and accolades rather than personal satisfaction. When he announced his intention to pursue law rather than medicine, I supported his choice, though I wondered if his decision was more about potential earnings than genuine interest. Sarah blossomed into a creative, empathetic young woman. Her artistic talents evolved from childhood sketches to sophisticated designs. She struggled more in traditional academics, but found her niche in visual arts and design programs. When she decided on interior design as a career, it seemed a perfect match for her aesthetic sensibility and interpersonal skills. Jason, to my quiet pride, declared his intention to become a pediatrician in his sophomore year of high school. "I want to help kids like you do, Dad," he said simply. His natural empathy and analytical mind suited the profession well, and he approached his pre-medical studies with a dedication that reminded me of Elizabeth. I managed to pay for their education without significant financial strain. The practice had grown successful, and I'd always been careful with investments. Michael attended an Ivy League university, followed by law school. Sarah went to a well-respected design institute. Jason followed the familiar path through medical school that his mother and I had walked decades earlier. As they completed their education and began their careers, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Despite the tragedy of losing Elizabeth, the children had thrived. They were educated, employed, and seemed to be building good lives. If they were successful and happy, I reasoned then I had fulfilled my most important responsibility as a father. What I didn't realize then was that beneath the surface of their achievements, currents were forming that would eventually pull our family into dangerous waters. And I focused on what I could measure and missed the warning signs until it was almost too late. The years flew by as my children established their adult lives. Michael completed law school with honors and secured a position at a prestigious Boston firm specializing in corporate law. His ambition served him well in that high-pressure environment, and he quickly earned a reputation as a sharp, relentless attorney who could outwork anyone. The partners took notice, and his advancement was rapid. During his 3rd year at the firm, he met Veronica Chamberlain at a charity gala. The daughter of a banking executive, she moved in Boston's elite social circles and had connections that extended to politics and international business. They made a striking couple, both ambitious, both image-conscious, both determined to climb higher. Their wedding was an elaborate affair at the Chamberlain family estate, attended by judges, politicians, and corporate executives. I remember standing somewhat awkwardly at the reception, nursing a glass of champagne while watching Michael work the room. He moved with practiced ease among people who could advance his career. His laugh a bit louder than necessary, his attention always scanning for more important connections. Veronica did the same, the two of them occasionally meeting to exchange whispers before separating to continue networking. I wondered if Elizabeth would have recognized the boy we raised in this polished, calculating man. Sarah's path took a different direction. After graduation, she worked for several established design firms before starting her own business. She married David, an architect she met while collaborating on a renovation project. They complemented each other well, her creative vision and his technical precision, making them a formidable team professionally, as well as a well-matched couple personally. They moved to Providence for better business opportunities, which put some physical distance between us, but didn't initially affect our relationship. Jason followed through on his intention to become a pediatrician. He completed medical school and his residency at top programs, eventually accepting a position at a university teaching hospital. His genuine compassion for young patients and his research into childhood autoimmune disorders earned him respect in the field. He married Emily, a pediatric nurse he met during his residency, and they settled in a suburb not far from my home. As for me, I continued building the practice into what eventually became the Parker Children's Health Center. We expanded services, brought in specialists, and established a reputation for both medical excellence and compassionate care. The practice became a significant operation with 20 physicians and a full support staff serving thousands of families. My career brought professional satisfaction and financial success beyond what I'd ever anticipated. Careful investments compounded over decades, and the practice itself became increasingly valuable. By my late 50s, I had accumulated considerable wealth, not the dynastic fortune of families like the Chamberlains, but more than enough for a very comfortable retirement and a significant legacy for my children. At 60, I decided it was time to step back from practice. I sold my interest to the younger doctors, many of whom I had trained myself. The sale brought a substantial sum that, added to my existing investments, created a very healthy retirement fund. With my newfound freedom, I purchased a beautiful home on a lake about 40 minutes from Boston, large enough to host the entire family for holidays and special occasions, with a guest house where the children and their families could stay comfortably during visits. I envisioned this home becoming the new center of our family life. Christmas gatherings, summer barbecues, weekend visits with grandchildren running along the shore. These were the scenes I pictured. I designed a large kitchen for family cooking, a game room for children, and a fire pit by the lake for evening conversations. Every detail was planned with family togetherness in mind. Reality proved quite different from this idyllic vision. The first holiday I hosted, Thanksgiving, the year after I retired, was marked by brief visits and distracted conversations. Michael and Veronica arrived 3 hours late and left immediately after dinner, citing an important brunch the next day. Sarah and David could only stay one night due to client meetings. Jason and Emily stayed the longest, but were constantly checking their phones for hospital updates. I told myself this was normal, that adult children had busy lives. But as months passed, the pattern continued and deepened. Calls went unreturned for days. Invitations were declined with increasingly vague excuses. When we did connect, conversations remained surface-level discussions about weather, general news, and brief updates on work. Something essential was missing: a warmth and openness that had once characterized our family, even in difficult times. For a while, I wondered if I had somehow failed them as a father. Had I been too strict, too permissive, too focused on work? But as I reflected on their childhood and adolescence, I couldn't identify any serious parental failures that would explain this growing distance. We had our challenges, certainly, but I had always prioritized their well-being and shown them consistent love. During these years of growing separation, I continued supporting my children financially when needed, though I was careful not to create dependency. I had paid for their education in full, sparing them the student loans that burden many young professionals. When each one bought their first home, I contributed to the down payment. When Sarah's design business faced early challenges, I provided capital to keep it afloat. When Jason wanted to pursue an additional fellowship, I covered the reduced income during that training period. My financial assistance was offered freely without strings attached. I saw it as part of my role as a father to provide a foundation from which they could build their own success. I never mentioned these contributions in conversation or expected special gratitude. They were simply expressions of love and support. Alongside my family concerns, I found new purpose in retirement through philanthropic work. A colleague introduced me to the Children's Health Access Program, a non-profit organization working to provide medical care to underserved communities. Their mission resonated deeply with me, and I joined as an advisor, eventually becoming a board member. The work was meaningful, allowing me to apply my medical expertise to systemic problems rather than individual cases. As I became more involved in the organization, I began considering how my estate would eventually be distributed. I met with my financial advisor and attorney to update my will and establish trusts. My plan was straightforward. Each child would receive an equal share of my estate, with additional trusts established for my grandchildren's education. I also allocated a significant portion to the Children's Health Access Program to establish a permanent endowment for pediatric services in low-income areas. Additionally, I created separate investment accounts for each child that would transfer to them on their 40th birthdays, a substantial gift they could use according to their own priorities. These accounts were my secret, a surprise I looked forward to revealing at the appropriate time. Everything seemed in order. My children were established in their careers. I had a clear estate plan, and I was finding fulfillment in my retirement activities. If family gatherings were less frequent and warm than I'd hoped, I consoled myself with the knowledge that my children were building their own lives as they should. I didn't realize then that beneath this apparently stable situation, troubling currents were forming. The first hint came innocently enough at Michael's birthday dinner at an exclusive Boston restaurant. As Veronica excused herself to take a call, I overheard a fragment of conversation. "He doesn't suspect anything. No, he still thinks. We'll discuss the timeline later." The words themselves were innocent enough, but something in her tone gave me pause. I dismissed the feeling initially, attributing it to an overactive imagination. But in retrospect, this was the first ripple of the wave that would eventually crash into our family. The initial signs were subtle, easy to dismiss as normal family dynamics or coincidences. A dinner cancelled at the last minute. A conversation that ended abruptly when I entered the room. A question about my investments that seemed casual, but oddly specific. I might have ignored these signals indefinitely, if not for the birthday party incident. I turned 62 that spring, and for the first time in decades there was no family gathering. Michael cited a critical case at work. Sarah mentioned client deadlines. Jason was apologetic about hospital scheduling. Each excuse seemed plausible, individually, but collectively they formed a pattern that was harder to dismiss. The following week, I received a small package containing a store-bought card, signed by all 3 children and their spouses with a generic gift card to a restaurant chain. It was impersonal, perfunctory. Nothing like the thoughtful gifts and handwritten notes they'd given in previous years. Something had changed, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The father in me wanted to confront them directly, to ask what was wrong and try to fix it. The physician in me suggested a more methodical approach. Observe, gather data, analyze, then diagnose. I chose the latter path. I began paying closer attention to our interactions, noting patterns and inconsistencies. I reviewed our recent history, trying to identify any trigger that might have caused this shift. Had I said something offensive? Made a decision that hurt them? Crossed some boundary I wasn't aware of? Nothing significant came to mind. Then came the first concrete evidence that something more concerning was happening. I received a call from Jonathan Weber, my longtime investment advisor. "Louis, someone's been making inquiries about your accounts," he said, his voice carrying professional concern. "A man claiming to be your financial consultant contacted our office requesting detailed information about your holdings, withdrawal patterns, and beneficiary designations." When Jonathan described the consultant, it was clearly Michael. My son had apparently created a pretense to gain access to my financial information I would have shared if he'd simply asked me directly. A week later, I received a call that was equally troubling, but in a different way. It was from Patricia Winters, my estate attorney. "Dr. Parker," she began formally, "I'm calling to confirm your appointment tomorrow regarding the changes to your will." I had made no such appointment. When I explained this to Patricia, there was an awkward pause. "That's odd," she said. "My assistant received a call from your son, Jason. He said you wanted to review some adjustments to the distribution percentages and trustee designations." Now I had confirmation that at least 2 of my children were taking unusual interest in my financial affairs and estate planning. The question was why, and whether they were acting independently or in concert. The most disturbing revelation came through pure chance. I was having lunch with Richard Keller, a former colleague who had retired to Arizona, but was visiting Boston for a medical conference. As we caught up, he mentioned seeing Michael at a fundraising event the previous month. "Your son gave quite a speech about his plans once he takes over the family resources," Richard said casually. "Very ambitious vision for expanding the practice into a regional network. Didn't realize you were stepping back so completely." I kept my expression neutral, but internally I was reeling. The practice had already been sold years earlier, and I had no plans to hand over management of my personal resources to Michael or anyone else. Whatever my son had told these potential investors was fiction. Fiction apparently designed to leverage my reputation and assets for his own purposes. That evening, I did something I never imagined doing. I called Stanley Grayson, a former patient whose private investigation firm now specialized in financial fraud and family disputes. I explained the situation as objectively as possible, emphasizing that I wanted information, not accusations. "Unfortunately, Dr. Parker, what you're describing isn't uncommon," Stanley said. "We see similar patterns when adult children begin positioning themselves to control an aging parent's assets. It typically starts with information gathering progresses to isolating the parent from other family members or advisors, then culminates in legal maneuvers to gain control." His words chilled me. Was that how my children saw me now? Not as their father, but as a collection of assets to be managed and eventually acquired. Had I somehow raised them to view relationships in such transactional terms? Stanley's investigation over the next 2 months revealed a disturbing picture. Michael had accumulated significant debt through risky investments and an extravagant lifestyle beyond even his substantial income. He was also under internal review at his firm for potential financial improprieties. Sarah's design business was struggling with cash flow issues and unpaid tax liabilities. Only Jason's finances appeared relatively stable, though he and Emily had recently purchased a home that stretched their budget considerably. More concerning than these financial pressures were the communications Stanley uncovered. Email exchanges between my 3 children discussed strategies for managing Dad's assets and ensuring our interests are protected. Michael had taken the lead, presenting himself as the most qualified to oversee the transition due to his legal background. He had outlined a plan to gradually convince me to grant them greater control over my finances, with the ultimate goal of a complete transfer of authority. The most painful discovery was a document Michael had drafted titled Intervention Strategy. It detailed approaches for confronting me about my declining decision-making capacity and concerning spending patterns, neither of which had any basis in reality. My cognitive abilities were sharp, my health excellent, and my financial management as prudent as ever. But the document laid out a script for claiming otherwise complete, with suggestions for which examples to cite as evidence of impairment. I sat in my study late one night reviewing Stanley's final report with a glass of scotch I couldn't bring myself to drink. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. My children. The 3 people I had devoted my life to raising, supporting and loving, were conspiring to declare me incompetent and seize control of my assets. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a series of coincidences. It was a calculated plan, developed over months, targeting me as if I were an obstacle rather than their father. My first instinct was confrontation, to call a family meeting immediately and lay the evidence before them, demanding explanations. But the strategist in me recognized the disadvantage of acting from emotion rather than calculation. If I confronted them directly, they would simply regroup and develop a different approach. I needed to understand the full extent of their plan before deciding how to respond. So I did what they least expected. I continued as if nothing had changed, maintaining our normal, increasingly distant relationship patterns. Meanwhile, I worked with my financial advisors and attorneys to protect my assets through irrevocable trusts and other legal structures that would be difficult to challenge. I underwent comprehensive cognitive and physical evaluations, documenting my excellent health and mental acuity. I transferred significant assets to the charitable foundation I'd established, ensuring they would be used according to my wishes, regardless of what happened with my personal estate. As Christmas approached, I decided it was time for resolution. The annual family gathering at my lake house would provide the perfect setting for the confrontation that now seemed inevitable. I sent warm invitations, emphasizing how much I looked forward to having everyone together, how I'd prepared their favorite foods and decorated extensively. All 3 children accepted committing to staying from Christmas Eve through Boxing Day. This in itself was unusual, as recent visits had been abbreviated to the point of being mere appearances. Their ready acceptance suggested they saw this as an opportunity to implement their intervention strategy. I prepared meticulously. The house was indeed beautifully decorated, the kitchen stocked with ingredients for everyone's favorite dishes. Guest rooms were prepared with fresh linens and small personal touches. To all appearances, I was simply an eager father looking forward to a holiday reunion. But in my study, locked in the desk drawer, was a folder containing copies of emails, financial records, the intervention strategy document, and other evidence Stanley had gathered. I had reviewed this material so often I could recite portions from memory, yet each reading brought fresh pain. These pages documented not just a financial scheme, but the unraveling of what I had believed was our family's unbreakable bond. As I made final preparations on Christmas Eve morning, I found myself standing in the kitchen, looking out at the frozen lake. Snow dusted the pines along the shore, creating the perfect holiday scene I had envisioned when purchasing the property. I had imagined years of family gatherings here, grandchildren learning to skate on the lake, holiday traditions being established and passed down. Now I wondered if this would be the last Christmas this house would serve as our family gathering place. By evening, everything would change. The only question was, what would remain of our family when the truth was finally exposed? The house was filled with the aroma of roasting turkey and cinnamon by the time the first car pulled into the driveway. Jason and Emily arrived first, their sedan loaded with overnight bags and wrapped presents. I greeted them at the door with genuine warmth, noting how Jason's eyes didn't quite meet mine as he returned my hug. "The place looks amazing, Dad," he said, taking in the decorated great room with its 12-foot Christmas tree and crackling fireplace. "You went all out." "It's not every day I get all my children under one roof," I replied. "Go settle in. Your usual room is ready." Sarah and David arrived 40 minutes later, their entrance bringing a flurry of activity as they unloaded their car and brought in more gifts. Sarah seemed tense, her smile not reaching her eyes as she kissed my cheek. "Merry Christmas, Dad. Something smells wonderful." "Your grandmother's recipe for apple spice cake," I told her. "I remembered it was always your favorite." A flicker of genuine emotion crossed her face before she looked away. "You didn't have to go to all that trouble." "It's no trouble to do something special for my daughter." Michael and Veronica arrived last, their luxury SUV crunching on the snow-covered driveway, just as dusk was falling. They entered with the practiced charm of people accustomed to making an impression. Michael carrying expensive wine, Veronica shepherding their 2 children, Caroline and Thomas, aged 7 and 5. "Dad looking good," Michael said with a heartiness that rang false. "Keeping fit, I see. Still doing those morning swims." His reference to my exercise routine struck me as calculated, setting up a narrative of my physical capabilities while subtly checking if my habits had changed. I simply nodded. When the lake isn't frozen, how's the firm? Busy as always. Year-end is always chaos. He waved a hand dismissively. But I've left strict instructions not to be disturbed. This weekend is all about family. The emphasis he placed on family might have seemed warm to an outside observer, but I caught the quick glance he exchanged with Veronica. This was part of their script. The initial hours passed in a performance of normalcy. We had drinks by the fire while the children played with the train set I'd installed around the Christmas tree. Conversation stayed on safe topics, weather, travel conditions, the children's school activities. If the adults' laughter seemed forced, and their eyes occasionally darted to each other with meaningful glances, it could have been dismissed as ordinary family dynamics. Dinner was served at 7, a traditional Christmas Eve feast laid out on the dining table that had once belonged to Elizabeth's parents. Turkey ham, all the traditional sides, and 3 different desserts including Sarah's apple spice cake. I'd arranged the seating strategically, placing myself at the head with clear sight lines to all 3 of my children. As we took our places, I raised a glass. To family, I said simply. To being together. There was a momentary hesitation before they raised their glasses in return. To family. They echoed the word hollow in their mouths. The meal progressed with the strange duality of surface pleasantries covering deeper currents. We discussed the children's activities, exchanged harmless anecdotes about work, and carefully avoided any substantive topics. It was the conversation of acquaintances, not a family with shared history and genuine interest in each other's lives. I noticed my children barely touched their wine, while I made a point of refilling my glass several times. Let them think I was becoming less sharp as the evening progressed. Let them believe their opportunity was approaching. After dinner, we moved to the great room for coffee and dessert. Caroline and Thomas were allowed to open 1 present each, a Christmas Eve tradition from my own childhood that I'd passed down. Their genuine excitement provided the evening's only authentic emotional moment. Michael checked his watch repeatedly, exchanging glances with his siblings. Whatever they had planned, it was approaching. "Dad," Michael finally said, setting down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "We need to talk about something important." I noticed Sarah shift uncomfortably on the couch, while Jason suddenly became very interested in straightening the cushions beside him. Neither would meet my eyes. "Of course," I said, keeping my voice mild. "What's on your mind?" Michael stood positioning himself before the fireplace in what I recognized as his courtroom stance. "This isn't easy, but we've been concerned for some time about certain decisions you've been making." "Decisions," I echoed innocently. "Financial decisions primarily, though there are other issues as well." His tone was measured, rehearsed. "The purchase of this house, for instance. It's far too large for one person, difficult to maintain, and represented a significant outlay at a time when you should be conserving resources." I raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware my financial choices required your approval, Michael." He pressed on. "It's not about approval, Dad. It's about concern. You've always been financially prudent, but lately you've made several questionable choices. Such as the donations to that children's charity, for one." He said this as if identifying a particularly reckless gambling habit. "The amounts are disproportionate to your resources." I noticed how carefully he avoided mentioning specific numbers. He didn't want to reveal how deeply he had investigated my finances. "The Children's Health Access Program provides essential services to those who need them most," I said calmly. "I believe in their mission." "Nobody's questioning the worthiness of the cause," Sarah interjected, finding her voice. "It's about balance and looking to the future." "My future?" I asked. "Or yours?" The question hung in the air, creating a moment of uncomfortable silence. Michael cleared his throat and continued. Dad, we've discussed this extensively among ourselves. We've observed patterns that concern us, memory lapses, confusion about dates and appointments, impulsive decisions. It was all I could do not to laugh at the absurdity. I had never missed an appointment or shown any cognitive decline. These were inventions created to justify what they were about to propose. Jason finally spoke, his voice quiet. Dad, we love you. We want what's best for you. And sometimes that means making difficult decisions. What decisions have you made on my behalf? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Michael squared his shoulders clearly, reaching the prepared climax of his speech. We've consulted with specialists. We've considered all options. And we've come to a difficult conclusion. Here it was, the moment they would reveal their true intentions. Michael looked me directly in the eyes, his voice taking on a formal tone I'd heard him use in video recordings of his courtroom appearances. We voted, and you are no longer a member of our family. The statement was so bizarre, so far from the financial power grab I'd expected, that for a moment I was genuinely confused. You're cutting ties with me. Disowning me? I asked, trying to make sense of this approach. It's not personal. Louis, Veronica said, speaking for the first time. Her use of my first name was clearly deliberate, establishing distance. It's about creating appropriate boundaries and expectations. We feel it's better for everyone if we formalize the separation, Michael continued. We've prepared documents outlining a fair division of assets. You'll retain enough for a comfortable retirement in a more appropriate setting. The remainder will be distributed according to the family's consensus. Now I understood. They weren't just after control of my assets while I lived. They wanted immediate distribution, a complete disinheritance in reverse. And they dressed it up in this bizarre language of family membership to make it seem like something other than the naked financial grab it was. I studied each of their faces. Michael confident and calculating. Veronica coolly assessing my reaction. Sarah uncomfortable but committed to the plan. David deliberately blank, avoiding involvement. Jason visibly conflicted, but unwilling to break ranks. Emily staring at her hands, clearly wishing she were elsewhere. In that moment, I felt a curious sense of calm. The worst had happened. My children had revealed themselves completely. There was no more uncertainty, no need for investigation or speculation. The situation was clear, and now I could respond authentically. I rose slowly from my chair. I see, I said quietly. Give me a moment. I walked to my study without looking back, hearing urgent whispers erupt as soon as I left the room. They were analyzing my reaction, adjusting their approach, preparing for whatever came next. But nothing in their planning had prepared them for what I was about to do. From my desk drawer, I retrieved the folder I had prepared. It contained not just the evidence of their conspiracy, but also documentation of my recent legal actions to protect my assets, and a letter explaining my profound disappointment in their choices. I had prepared it, hoping I wouldn't need to use it. That hope was now gone. I returned to the great room where tense silence fell as I entered. I smiled not warmly, but with the calm certainty of someone who has seen through a deception. Before I respond to your extraordinary proposal, I said, I have a parting gift for you, Michael, since you've appointed yourself spokesperson for this family coup. I extended the folder. Michael hesitated, then took it, his expression wavering between triumph and uncertainty. What's this? He asked. Some kind of counteroffer. Open it, I said simply. I think you'll find it enlightening. As he flipped open the cover, I watched his face. The color drained from his features, as he registered what he was seeing. His hands began to tremble slightly as he turned pages each one, revealing more of what I knew and what I had done in response. "This is," he began, but couldn't finish the sentence. "Evidence," I supplied, "of conspiracy, of attempted financial exploitation, of plans to declare me incompetent based on fabricated concerns. It's all there, Michael. The emails, the strategy documents, the unauthorized inquiries into my accounts, even recordings of phone calls to my financial advisors where you impersonated my consultant." Sarah stood up. "Michael, what is he talking about?" Michael didn't answer, still staring at the contents of the folder. "Your brother has been planning a financial takeover for months," I explained, turning to Sarah. "And you and Jason agreed to help him, though I suspect you weren't aware of the full extent of his deception." Jason's face had gone white. "Dad, I don't know what you think. I don't think Jason. I know. It's all documented there." I nodded toward the folder. "Every email where you discussed how to approach me. Every conversation about the intervention strategy. Every plan for how my assets would be redistributed once you gained control." The room fell into stunned silence. Caroline and Thomas, sensing the tension but not understanding its cause, had stopped playing and were watching the adults with wide eyes. Veronica was the first to recover. "This is absurd," she said, her voice sharp. "Michael was trying to protect you. We all were. Your spending has become erratic. Your judgment questionable." "My judgment is fine, Veronica," I replied evenly, "as confirmed by the comprehensive neurological and psychological evaluations included in that folder. Evaluations conducted by independent specialists with no connection to me or this family." Michael finally looked up from the folder, his face a mask of shock and dawning realization. "You knew," he said hoarsely. "You've known all along." "Not all along," I corrected, "but for several months now. Long enough to take protective measures." "What kind of measures?" Sarah asked, her voice small. "Legal ones," I answered. "My assets have been restructured. New trusts established with independent trustees. Charitable commitments formalized. Even if you had succeeded in having me declared incompetent, you would have gained control of very little." Michael slumped back into his chair, the folder falling to the floor, its contents spilling out. One page slid toward Sarah, who picked it up and began reading her hand, covering her mouth as she absorbed its contents. "You investigated us," she whispered. "I investigated a conspiracy against me," I corrected gently. "A conspiracy you joined, Sarah, even if you weren't its architect." "I didn't know it had gone this far," she protested. "Michael said you were making bad decisions, that you might be showing early signs of cognitive decline. He said we needed to intervene before you lost everything." I turned to my eldest son. "Is that what you told them, Michael? That this was about protecting me, rather than solving your own financial problems?" His silence was answer enough. Jason stood up, visibly shaken. "Dad, I swear I didn't know about any attempts to access your accounts or declare you incompetent. Michael just said we needed to present a united front about concerns over your spending, that you'd be more likely to listen if we all agreed. And yet you participated in discussions about redistributing my assets," I noted. "Assets I earned through decades of work. Assets I've always been generous in sharing with all of you." The room fell into uncomfortable silence again, broken only when little Thomas asked, "Mummy, why is everyone mad?" Veronica gathered both children. "It's time for bed," she announced, avoiding everyone's eyes as she ushered them upstairs. When they had gone, I looked at each of my children in turn. "I've made my own decisions," I told them. decisions necessitated by your actions. What kind of decisions? Michael asked, a note of desperation in his voice. For one, I've established irrevocable trusts for each of my grandchildren. Their education and certain other needs will be provided for, regardless of what happens between us. They shouldn't suffer for their parents' choices. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Are you saying you've disinherited us? I'm saying I've protected my assets from exploitation, I clarified, and I've ensured they'll be used according to my wishes, not yours. As for our relationship moving forward, that depends entirely on what happens next. What do you mean? Jason asked. I sat down again, suddenly feeling the weight of the evening, of the months of investigation and planning, of the fundamental betrayal by those I had loved and trusted most. I mean that tonight represents a crossroads, not for my family membership, as you put it, but for our actual relationship as father and children. You have a choice to make. In the silence that followed my statement, I could almost hear the mental calculations taking place behind each of their expressions. Michael's face shifted between anger, fear, and calculation. Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks, her eyes darting between her brothers. Jason stood with his hands gripping the back of a chair, his knuckles white. What kind of choice? Michael finally asked, his lawyer's instinct for negotiation asserting itself even now. A simple one, I replied. You can walk out that door, continue on your current path, and deal with the consequences. Or you can stay, acknowledge what you've done, and begin the difficult process of rebuilding trust. Consequences, Michael echoed. Are you threatening us? I shook my head. I'm stating facts. If you choose to leave the contents of that folder, go to the relevant authorities. Your firm would be interested in your attempts to access my accounts fraudulently. The Bar Association might have questions about your ethical conduct. The IRS would certainly want to review certain transactions you've made. Michael's face hardened. You'd do that to your own son. I didn't create this situation, Michael. You did. Each of you did, though, to varying degrees. I turned to include Sarah and Jason in my gaze. And let's be clear, if you walk away, now it will be you abandoning me, not the other way around. Despite everything, I'm still offering a path forward. Sarah spoke up, her voice quavering. Dad, I never wanted any of this. Michael said you were making financial mistakes, that we needed to protect the family assets. I never thought. You never thought to come to me directly, I finished for her, to ask me about your concerns, to have an honest conversation with your father instead of conspiring behind my back. She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. Jason stepped forward. What would rebuilding trust involve, exactly? What are you asking us to do? It was a fair question, and I appreciated that he was the first to ask it. Complete transparency would be the first step, full disclosure of what each of you knew and did. Then professional help, family counseling, to address whatever led us to this point. It won't be quick or easy. Trust once broken doesn't mend overnight. Michael scoffed. Therapy. You expect us to sit around talking about our feelings. I expect nothing. Michael, I said calmly, I'm offering an option. Whether you take it is entirely your choice. And our financial situation, he pressed. The trusts you mentioned, the restructuring. Even now it was about the money for him. Those changes are irrevocable, but there could be other arrangements in the future depending on how things develop between us. Veronica returned, having settled the children. What's happening? She asked, looking at Michael's tense posture. Dad's offering us a choice, Michael replied bitterly. Confession and therapy, or legal consequences. Veronica's carefully maintained composure cracked. This is ridiculous. Michael was trying to help you, Louis. Yes, perhaps his methods were questionable, but his intentions, were entirely self-serving, I interrupted. Let's not pretend otherwise. Michael has accumulated substantial debt through risky investments. His position at the firm is precarious due to certain financial irregularities. He saw my assets as the solution to his problems. Michael's head snapped up. How do you know about the firm that's confidential? I had you investigated, Michael, just as thoroughly as you investigated me. The difference is I had actual cause for concern. Veronica looked at her husband, alarm spreading across her features. What is he talking about? What financial irregularities? Michael avoided her gaze. It's nothing. A misunderstanding about client billing that's being resolved. It's embezzlement, I corrected, and it's not the first time. There was an incident during your second year that was covered up due to your father-in-law's influence. Not this time, though. The partners are building a case. Veronica's face paled. Is this true? Tell me this isn't true. The strain between them was palpable, another relationship fracturing under the weight of tonight's revelations. Sarah looked from Michael to me, then to her husband, David, who had remained silent throughout. I can't believe this is happening, she whispered. How did we get here? It was the first honest question of the evening, and it deserved an honest answer. We got here through a series of choices. I said, my voice gentler now. Small compromises that led to larger ones. Assumptions that went unchallenged. Communications that never happened. And perhaps most fundamentally, a shift from viewing family as a support system to seeing it as a financial arrangement. Jason sat heavily on the couch. When Mom died, he said quietly, you told us that family was all that really mattered, that as long as we had each other, we could get through anything. I still believe that, I told him. The question is whether you do. Emily, who had been silent throughout, suddenly stood. I can't do this, she said, her voice breaking. Jason, this isn't who we are. This isn't who you are. She turned to me. Dr. Parker, I'm so sorry. I knew something was happening, but I didn't understand what. I should have said something. Jason reached for her hand. Wait. No, she said firmly. I'm going upstairs to pack. I'll sleep in the car if necessary. But I won't stay another minute in the middle of this horrible situation you've all created. She looked at each of my children in turn. He raised you. He supported you. He gave you everything, and this is how you repay him. By trying to take what's left. I don't recognize any of you right now. She left the room, her footsteps quick on the stairs. Her departure created a shift in the atmosphere. Emily, the outsider, had named the ugliness at the heart of the situation with a clarity the rest of us had avoided. Her moral certainty highlighted the ethical failure of everyone else in the room. She's right, Sarah said after a long moment. This is horrible. All of it. She turned to me. Dad, I am so sorry. I let myself be convinced this was for your own good, but it never felt right. I should have trusted that feeling. It was the first genuine apology of the night, and though it couldn't erase what had happened, it created an opening. David put an arm around Sarah. I tried to tell you this wasn't the way to handle concerns, he said gently. If we're staying to work this out, we need to start with complete honesty. Sarah nodded, tears flowing freely now. I want to stay. I want to fix this if that's even possible. I looked to Jason, who was staring at the floor. Jason. He raised his head, his expression anguished. When Michael first approached me, he said you were showing signs of decline similar to Grandpa's before his Alzheimer's diagnosis. That scared me. The thought of losing you that way. He trailed off. But I never saw those signs myself. I let fear override my own observations, my own knowledge as a physician. That's unforgivable. Not unforgivable, I corrected. Difficult to forgive, perhaps, but not impossible. Michael remained standing by the fireplace, his body tense. So that's it. Sarah and Jason make teary apologies, and everything's forgiven. What about the irrevocable changes you've made? What happens to our inheritance now? Even now, he couldn't see beyond the financial implications. It was as if we were speaking different languages, operating from completely different value systems. Michael, I said, trying one last time to reach the son I had raised. This isn't about money. It's about trust, respect, honesty, the foundation of any family relationship. Those are what need to be rebuilt. He stared at me for a long moment, then laughed bitterly. You know what? Keep your money. Keep your moral high ground. I don't need any of it. He turned to Veronica. We're leaving. Now. Veronica hesitated, glancing upstairs where her children were sleeping. Michael, it's Christmas Eve. The children will be devastated if we leave before morning. Then stay with them, he snapped. I'm not spending another minute here being lectured and threatened. She flinched at his tone. What about what Dr. Parker said about the firm investigating you? It's handled, he said dismissively. Dad's exaggerating to manipulate the situation. I shook my head. I wish I were Michael, but the documentation is there. I nodded toward the folder on the floor. Page 17 contains a memo from the managing partner detailing the investigation. They've already contacted the authorities. Michael's facade cracked. For a moment I saw raw fear in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by cold determination. I'll deal with it. I always do. He headed for the door, grabbing his coat. Michael, wait, Jason called. You can't just leave like this. Watch me, Michael replied without turning around. The front door opened and closed with a decisive slam, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Veronica stood frozen for a moment, then seemed to collapse in on herself, sinking onto the couch. I didn't know, she whispered, about any of it. The debt, the investigation at the firm, this plan against you. He told me your cognitive health was failing, and we needed to help manage your affairs. That's all I knew. Whether I believed her or not was almost irrelevant at this point. She was part of my grandchildren's lives, and for their sake I would treat her with civility. The children can stay as planned, I told her. Whatever happens next doesn't need to impact their Christmas. She nodded gratefully. Thank you. I don't know what to tell them about Michael. The truth in age-appropriate terms, I suggested, that their father had an emergency, that sometimes adults make mistakes and need time to fix them. The irony of offering parenting advice in this situation wasn't lost on me. But then families are complicated, never more so than in times of crisis. Sarah moved to sit beside me, tentatively reaching for my hand. Dad, where do we go from here? How do we even begin to make this right? It was the question I'd been asking myself for months, ever since I first discovered their betrayal. I had prepared for the confrontation, protected my assets, gathered evidence. But I hadn't fully resolved how I wanted things to proceed if we reached this point. We start with truth, I said finally. All of it, no matter how painful. Then we see what can be rebuilt from there. Jason joined us, sitting on my other side. I'm willing to try, he said quietly. I need to make this right for Emily's sake as much as ours. She deserves better than the person I've been these past months. As the clock on the mantel struck midnight, marking the arrival of Christmas Day, we sat together in my living room, a broken family, taking the first tentative steps toward healing. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with painful conversations and uncomfortable truths. Trust once shattered doesn't mend easily. But that night, amid the wreckage of what had been planned as a family ambush, we found a fragile beginning. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. But it was something. And sometimes, something is all you can hope for. A year has passed since that fateful Christmas Eve, when my children tried to remove me from the family I had built. The seasons have cycled through winter's stark beauty, to spring's renewal, summer's abundance, and now back to the crystalline days of early December. The lake outside my window reflects a pale blue sky ice, forming along its edges a mirror to the slow thaw that has occurred within our family. Michael's path took the most dramatic turn. 3 days after storming out of my house, he was arrested on charges of embezzlement and fraud. The firm had been building a case for months, documenting his misappropriation of client funds to cover personal investments gone wrong. His father-in-law's influence, once so powerful, couldn't shield him this time. The evidence was too substantial, the pattern too established. He accepted a plea deal that spared him the maximum sentence, but still resulted in a 2-year prison term and permanent disbarment. Veronica filed for divorce shortly after his sentencing, leveraging her family's connections to secure a favorable settlement and primary custody of the children. She has since moved back to her parents' estate in Connecticut, allowing me limited but regular visits with my grandchildren. Our relationship remains strained but civil. Whatever her knowledge of or participation in Michael's schemes, she has worked to ensure Caroline and Thomas maintain a relationship with me. For that, I am grateful. The children visit during school breaks, their presence bringing life and noise to rooms that too often stand empty. Sarah's journey toward redemption began in earnest the day after Christmas. While the others slept, she came to my study early that morning carrying a folder of her own. Inside were complete financial records for her design business, revealing the extent of its troubles: tax liens, unpaid vendors, dwindling client base. She had hidden these problems from David, from her brothers, and especially from me, ashamed of what she perceived as failure. "I let pride keep me from asking for help," she admitted. "Then when Michael suggested a way to access your assets, it seemed like a solution. I told myself it was just accelerating an inheritance that would eventually be mine anyway. I never considered it might be wrong, not just legally but morally." Her honesty, painful as it was to hear, created the foundation for rebuilding. Over the subsequent months, we worked together to restructure her business. Not through handouts, but through a formal business loan with clear terms and expectations. I connected her with a financial advisor and a business coach. She committed to therapy both individually and with David, addressing the insecurities that had led her to such poor decisions. Today, her design firm operates on sound financial footing, with a growing reputation for sustainable, accessible interiors. She pays back the loan monthly, never missing a payment. Our weekly calls have evolved from awkward status updates to genuine conversations. The trust is returning slowly but steadily, built on actions rather than words. Jason's path to redemption has perhaps been the quietest, but most profound. Emily's moral stand that night became a turning point for them both. She had seen something in him that troubled her deeply, a willingness to compromise his values under pressure. Their marriage hung in the balance as they left my house that Christmas day. "I almost lost her," Jason told me months later. "She said she couldn't be with someone who would betray their own father for money. She was right. I couldn't recognize myself in what I'd done." He threw himself into the therapy process with the same dedication he brings to medicine. Individual sessions, couples counseling with Emily, family sessions with me, and eventually with Sarah as well. He asked the hard questions, faced uncomfortable truths, and did the difficult work of rebuilding his moral compass. Most significantly, he approached his hospital administration with a proposal for a free pediatric clinic serving low-income communities. When they hesitated over funding concerns, he volunteered to reduce his own hours and salary to help launch the project. The Children's Health Access Program. The same organization I had supported became a partner in the initiative. This past October, I attended the clinic's opening ceremony. Watching Jason interact with the first young patients I saw, echoes of Elizabeth and myself at his age, the genuine compassion, the focus on the child rather than the chart. It was a powerful reminder that despite our recent troubles, the core values we had tried to instill had taken root. As for me, this year has been one of profound reflection. I've examined my own role in creating the family dynamic that led to last Christmas's confrontation. Had I been too focused on financial support at the expense of emotional connection? Had I unwittingly created an expectation that my resources would always solve their problems? Had my pride in their professional accomplishments blinded me to character issues that needed addressing? These questions have no simple answers. Parenting never comes with a manual, and even decades of experience provide no immunity from mistakes. What I know with certainty is that I'm approaching this Christmas with clearer eyes and stronger boundaries. The family trust structures remain in place, providing for my grandchildren's education and certain other needs while protecting the bulk of my assets from exploitation. I've increased my involvement with the Children's Health Access Program, finding purpose and community in their mission. I've even begun dating again, a surprising development that began with a chance meeting at a hospital fundraiser 6 months ago. Margaret is a retired oncology nurse with a direct manner and quick wit that reminds me in some ways of Elizabeth. But the most significant change has been internal, a shift from seeing family relationships through the lens of unconditional support to viewing them as connections that require mutual respect and healthy boundaries. Love remains unconditional, but trust must be earned. Forgiveness is possible, but consequences remain. This Christmas will be different from any before. Michael, now 15 months into his sentence, won't be present. Veronica has agreed to bring the children for Christmas Eve, but will return to Connecticut for Christmas Day with her family. Sarah and David will join us, bringing news of their first pregnancy, a grandchild who will be born next spring. Jason and Emily will come perhaps with an announcement of their own, judging by the hints in our recent conversations. I've decorated more modestly this year. The massive tree has been replaced by a smaller one, adorned with ornaments that hold genuine meaning rather than impressive display. The menu is simpler, focused on dishes we truly enjoy rather than holiday showpieces. The guest list includes not just family, but friends who have supported me through this difficult year. The irrevocable trusts I established ensure my grandchildren's future needs will be met, while the restructured estate plan reflects my current assessment of my children's character and choices. Sarah and Jason will eventually receive their portions, though, with oversight provisions that would have seemed unnecessary before last Christmas. A significant portion still goes to charitable causes, particularly those supporting children's health and welfare. As I prepare for this gathering, arranging pine boughs on the mantel and checking my list of last-minute items, I find myself reflecting on the nature of family. We enter these relationships by birth or marriage, bound by blood and law. But the true connections are built through thousands of small moments of care, respect, and honesty. When those elements erode, no legal tie or genetic link can maintain the relationship's health. The crisis of last Christmas stripped away illusions and exposed harsh truths, but it also created space for something more authentic to grow. The family gathering around my table this year will be smaller, the conversations more honest, the relationships less idealized, but more real. We have learned painfully that true family bonds aren't automatic or guaranteed. They must be nurtured, respected, and sometimes rebuilt from their foundations. What began as the worst Christmas of my life has surprisingly led to relationships of greater integrity with at least some of my children. The process has been painful. The loss is real. Michael's choices have taken him out of our daily lives, though I continue to write to him monthly, receiving occasional brief responses. But with Sarah and Jason, something new and healthier is emerging from the ashes of what was destroyed. If there's wisdom I can share from this experience, it's this: family relationships, like all important connections, must be based on mutual respect and honesty. Financial support without these elements creates dependency rather than growth. Love must have boundaries to remain healthy. And sometimes the most loving thing we can do is allow people to face the consequences of their own choices. As I finish preparing for tomorrow's gathering, I place Elizabeth's photo on the mantel, as I do every Christmas. We did our best, I tell her silently. They've made their choices good and bad, but there's still love here. There's still family, just reshaped into something different than we imagined. I believe she would understand. She always saw our children clearly, loving them completely, while recognizing their individual struggles and strengths. She would grieve for Michael's choices, but support the difficult boundaries I've established. She would celebrate the healing beginning with Sarah and Jason, the grandchildren who carry our legacy forward. This Christmas, marked by absence and presence, by loss and renewal, by painful truths and new beginnings, feels closer to the heart of what family truly means than many easier, more perfect-seeming celebrations of the past. There is sorrow in what has been lost, but also hope in what remains and what might yet be built. Have you ever had to rebuild trust with someone you love after a profound betrayal, or set difficult boundaries with family members? I'd genuinely like to hear your stories in the comments below. Family relationships can be so complex, filled with both deep love and painful challenges. If this story resonated with you, please consider hitting that subscribe button and sharing it with others who might find comfort in knowing they're not alone in navigating complicated family dynamics. And remember, sometimes the most meaningful family bonds are those we rebuild after they've been broken stronger at the mended places. Thank you for being part of this journey, and I wish you peace and authentic connections this holiday season.